Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Elder Talk. My name is Richard Jurgensen, and I'm proud to introduce our guest tonight. But before I do, I'd like to take a few moments and tell you a little bit about our sponsors. Our own Little Lake Grange and the Willits Economic Localization, of which Freddie was speaking of. And I'll just read some quick bullet points here. The Well is a membership community organization open to anybody living in the greater Willits area. Our mission statement perhaps says it best: to foster the creation of local sustainable economy in the Willits area by partnering with other organizations, to watch for opportunities, vulnerabilities, to incubate and coordinate projects and facilitate dialogue, action, and education within our community. The Little Lake Grange is open to anyone of good character who is interested in agriculture and community service. We function as a local, county, state, and national level. The Grange mission statement reads, "The Granges of California provide opportunities to enhance your communities today for generations of tomorrow by promoting growth through family, community, and grassroots legislative action." For more details on both of these organizations, there's brochures and pamphlets in the back. Please help yourself on your way out tonight. We would like to recognize, and a few thank yous tonight, to our audio and video technicians, Al Rosen, Jeff Smith, Andrew Wright. They have all been recording and archiving these and many other memorable evenings for the last 2.5 years. Also, we'd like to thank the Granger worker bees who came in this weekend for a cleaning party. Erica, Ellie, George, Tim, Annie, Freddie, RJ, Stephanie, Brian Weller, our set designer. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. But a big thank you to everyone that made this evening possible. There will be no intermission, so you can grab some food on your way out if you already haven't. And now our guests. Pat Rennick is one of the Sherwood Rancheria elders in a traditional northern Pomo.
Married about 3 years.
The Persico family, brothers Chuck Lee and their mother Florence Prosecco, represent 3 generations living here in Little Lake Valley. So I hope you're all ready for some wonderful storytelling tonight. And without further ado, I turn it over to Annie.
Okay, thank you, RJ. Welcome, everybody. Looks like we're adding chairs in. Hopefully we're just about done with that. And there's some fill-in in the front if anyone's looking for a seat. So my name's Ann Weller, and I'm going to moderate this panel tonight. And it'll be an interesting night. Poor Florence has come down with laryngitis unexpectedly, so she may or may not be able to speak. And so I told her to just slap the guys across the head if she wanted them to say something in her stead. So she's got them in hand right there. And we're going to start with Pat, though. So sitting here to my right is Pat Rennick, and he is an elder from the Pomo group, the coastal Pomos up here, the northern Pomo. And he'll tell you a little more about that. And we're going to say, Pat, welcome here tonight. And tell us a little bit about your early life, your relationship with your grandmother, where you grew up, what your grandmother shared with you. And I'll lead you forward into that conversation.
Okay, I was born June 21st, 1942. And I wasn't born in a hospital like most people are. I was born in a hop field in Drayton, California, down by Santa Rosa. And 3 days later, we went to the hospital when my cousin mother kept bleeding. And we lived in Ikai area for a while in Morby Ranch down. My dad was one of the first Indian foremen they had in those years that time. He's a ranch foreman for Morby Ranch. And today Ledford Ranch is near it, or the same ranch, they bought it. But my dad worked there, then my mother passed away and I was 8 months old, so my mother there that I knew was my grandmother, that was Lucy Cooper. And Lucy Cooper was unique because she was noted later on in life, I found out, as to go on, is she was one of the finest Pomo basket weavers in all of Pomos. And her stitches were 100 stitches per inch, really fine work. And those baskets, you don't see them around anymore. They're like in the Smithsonian and Field Museum in Chicago. And then there's some in St. Petersburg, Florida. St. Petersburg, Russia. You probably think, well, what's going on? Well, anyway, before the Western expansion, I'm Coast Yuki too. I was born up there today, what you call Hollow Tree. Remember where Hollow Tree Lumber Company was? I think most of you people do. There's a big lumber company in the days up there by Hales Grove. And so that's where our people were from. So in 1853, they herded them down to Mendocino Reservation. And that's where my grandparents and all my family kind of grew up around. Then in 1857, they moved them out. They said they were starving to death. Well, they weren't. How can you starve to death with that much seafood in the land? But anyway, they moved us out, so they never shackled us. So they moved us to Round Valley, and our people ran away the first night, went right back to Noyo. That's where they're at today. So nobody ever came back and gathered them up. So that's why we still have that little parcel down there. But it was really unique. Growing up, I was unique being around my grandparents, and because they were really the leaders of the people at that time. And my grandfather, well, there's a back there. You're welcome to it. I have a little family tree back there, and a table back there. You're welcome to take it. I made 60 copies, and you can see how the family tree goes, and it goes way back to 1800s, and it comes all the way up. But and then my formal education, I went to Noyo River Elementary School right there in Fort Bragg. So the school's going now, but that's where I first went to school. And the same teacher that spanked me for doing something wrong, climbing the hedges, spanked my dad too. You know?
Let's just cut in for a second while we're talking about school, and let's ask Lee or Chuck, if you're ready to talk. Tell us a little bit about where you went to school, just briefly, and then we'll go back again to Pat. How about you, Lee?
Well, it's pretty hard for me to figure out where I went to school since we started first grade right here and ended up in 7th grade over here. Actually, 6th grade, because in those days, the 7th and 8th grade was at the high school. So our first grade teacher was Mrs. Bailey, and we went right through the halls here and all these different rooms, and 6th grade was down there. Principal office was right over there. I visited quite often. As I look around, some of my friends out here were there too. Not pointing any fingers.
Okay, so we've got a reminder that this was once a school. I thought you guys would just need to hear about that again. And so back to you, Pat. Were there any other elders that influenced you? We're going to start talking about some of the things your grandmother shared with you, but anybody else you'd like to mention?
Well, that was the most significant person, was my grandmother. And then her children also had influences on me too. Della Cooper Campbell. They're all passed on now, but she had a lot of influence and tell me a lot of things. Because my grandmother died in 1949. That's when he left Ukiah Valley, went back to Fort Bragg, and buried my grandmother. And we stayed because that's where we're from. And so they said I cried for a month and a half after she passed away because I was really close to her. That's all I knew. But they taught me a lot. You know, I had to speak native tongue in order to get anything. I had to talk our language. Now let me tell you about something about Pomo language. There's 7 dialects. We have 7 dialects, and I knew what they call Kai Pomo, the northern Pomo. And so if everybody mentions Kai, then you know that means north. And so that's the language I spoke. And then at the same time, growing up, I call my dad's great aunt a grandmother, but she really wasn't. My grandmother was my grandmother, but I was, because that time you never decided to. Well, nobody told you anything. You had another grandmother, so that's all right. So that was my dad's great aunt, Della. When she was a pretty good basket weaver too, but nothing like her mother. And so they liked fish a lot. So that's what I would do as a kid. I remember collecting bottles, and then you want to go and go to the show on weekends. It was only a quarter then. And but I wouldn't do that. I would always go fishing. And everything on Noya Point, I was fish there all the time. Crawl on the rocks and get everything. I'd fish for crab. I learned how to do that. I used chicken wire and put bait in there and then throw it out, and the crab would get caught in that wire, and I'd bring it in. And I'd take it and bring it home, and we'd cook it. And I would gather all kinds of fish. And the unique thing about growing up that way, you learn how to do a lot of things. Like people nowadays don't know anything. I mean that's what I say, but you learn how to cure food. That's one thing I learned when I was a young man. Two significant parts of that was they call the grindstone Indians or salt Pomo. And the reason they were salt Pomo, that's where the natural salt licks were, and also ones down by Point Arena. So those two tribe-lit areas were important to us because we used the salt for curing. And so they were very important. And the trade routes, of course, we'll get into that a little bit later. But all the kind of fish, I know how to cure everything, and I know how to fish for everything. And when I was young, about 5, 6 years old, and they never wanted me around a rocks a lot, but he couldn't stop me. I was just like a crab. I'd just go all over the place. And I watched my grandfather, Jim Cooper, and he'd be busting up the sea urchins. And I was wondering why he was doing that. And later on, I knew, but that time I didn't know. Well, anyway, when the tide would come in, the fish would feed on that. And there you got every cast you had fish. But nobody knows those kind of things, But they don't think of that. But so I learned a lot from them. Then I'd eat pinnawinkles or periwinkles. You boil that and use a toothpick and get it out. And the China slippers. And then the abalone we get. And that time really was abundant, a lot of abalones before all the pollution. And we used to peel it like an apple core. You could take an apple core and you peel it. You can see just the skin and stuff. Well, that's how we do it, and they dry it. And that way, when you wanted to eat it, all you do is pick it down and cut a piece off and cook it. Put it in water, and it'll soften up and make soup out of it.
You want to talk about the clams? You told me that story about up at 10 Mile and the whole clam digging and then the preparation and all that.
Yeah. There was different parts of the coast is unique to their part. Like seaweed doesn't grow everywhere, clams doesn't grow everywhere. You think it may do, but it doesn't. There's specific points, and the same thing as your mussel. Mussel was we had a mussel rock there at Cleon that's still there yet today in Ward Avenue. I think so many people go to the coast, you know where that's at. So there's mussel still there yet today, and that was one of our major places to getting it. The seaweed that grew the best was really at Virgin Creek. Unbelievable. And my dad, when he was young, when there's no welfare and things and no jobs, he would pick seaweed and he'd sell it to Chinese people over there. I mean, he picked sacks and sacks of seaweed. And then the most important part of that, you dry it a certain way. And there's only one type of seaweed we got. There's a seaweed that the Filipinos eat. We call it five-finger, kind of built like that. And it's got little bubbles like, and that's a Filipino seaweed, but we don't eat that kind. And
There's seaweed samples. Pat's brought a bunch of seaweed he's got for himself, and it's out at the front table. You're all welcome to try that on your way out. It was harvested and prepared by him. And tell us what time of year we can find seaweed, Pat.
Well, seaweed really is only one time of the year that most people don't think of. Everything's in seasons. You know that with the game. It's really in that March and April and May, and after that it gets old real fast. That's what you see come up on the beach, like you see Cleon there, just piles of it comes up. That's all dead seaweed off the rocks. And then when you pick the seaweed, you got to lay it out like you want it. You know, in other words, don't clump it up and dry it, and you got to watch where you dry it. You put it right out in the hot sun, you'll kind of cook it, and that isn't what you want to do, because then you can't pull it apart to cook it properly. And so we lay it out in strings like they come off the rock, best way we can. And the best way to cure that seaweed is to do it in the ocean sun on the coast, because you get all that salt air in there too. And seaweed is really unique. In fact, you read history where the people down in South America would go into the mountains when the Spaniards came, and then they got these big goiters. Those Ecuadorians, and that's because they had no seaweed from the iodine, and so it got big goiters. And but now it's changed. People got their diet back and things, but it affects us all over the world. Many native people eat seaweed different ways.
Pat's going to be teaching a seaweed preparation class, and he's actually willing to do a harvesting as well later this spring. So if anyone's interested in going over the coast with Pat, harvesting, if you can't make it to the coast, you can do this side of the mountain the next day, probably very soon, right afterwards. There'll be the preparation. So he's very willing to share this with people, and I think, let's find out what he knows and take advantage of this. I got some seaweed a few years ago myself. I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just down at the coast, and there was this huge storm, and all the seaweed came in. So I gathered it up, and I'm dragging these bags up the cliffs, and actually it was pretty good. It was kelp, and I used it in soup for a couple of years. I don't know if I was supposed to use it for a couple of years, Pat, but I was too lazy to go back, so that's what I did. So just one more question about fishing. How about inland fishing in the rivers? You want to talk about the rivers then and now?
Yeah, on the rivers, we made our own traps, fish traps, out of vines, natural vines, and like a cylinder, we'd build them, and fish would go in there, and we'd catch them, like a cylinder shape, so they'd go in there, and you put them on a river. You know where you put them. You learn after a while the river course, and then we would catch a lot of them, and then preparation of it. I got very good at it over the years. Flay the fish, and then I would build a fire and make a smokehouse, and hang them, strip them. Now I strip them, put in small strips, get the flay out, and I put them in small strips, and I do that and smoke them. Put brown sugar and rock salt, and put it in a bucket and let it stay there for about 6-8 hours or overnight. Then you wash it off again. And you wonder why it's doing with brown sugar. Well, brown sugar stops botulism, so you don't get poisoned from any of those products. And fish is very volatile. I mean, they get spoiled fast. And then when you catch a surffish, and I remember that I was a little kid, like 49, 50, that we fished the A-frame nets, and before that we made our own nets from different plants. Took a long time to do it. I made some little ones, but never a full-size one. But to get the fish in number 3 size tub, which is a great big tub, you can remember taking a shower or bath in them. Most of us did, I think. Before showers were prevent it. But anyway, I have a field to be full of surffish, and my job was to lay it all out in the sand and then glaze it. So I turn it, leave it there for an hour in the sun, and I turn them all back over. There must be thousands of them. That tub was just full of them, and I never got bored as a little kid. They taught me, so I never got bored about anything like that kids would do today. So I would glaze them, and that way you could take them inland out to Ukiah or Santa Rosa or Sacramento. They wouldn't spoil on you. The surface is spoiling you within an hour or two. Get red head right away. I'm not saying red heads is a bad thing, Fritz.
So, okay, anything else you want to say about fish or coastal life, and then we'll go on to another subject.
Well, I fished all the rivers, all the way up the Noya River. In fact, Noya River, right behind our reservation up here on Octagon House, over the hill there, that's where the headwaters, the 10-mile river and the Noya River start. I don't think you people think that, but that's where the headwaters are. So I've been up all those up and down them fishing, and I can remember I got brave one time and told my dad I wanted to go fishing, trout fishing out Highway 20. I says, take me out there and just let me off. And little did I realize the meandering of the stream. And he let me off at about midday. And he said, you sure you can get off here? I said, yeah. It was out there where Chamberlain Creek is, the forestry, CDF. And so I went down to the stream there, me and my cousin, and boy, the fish are just thick in there. It's a closed stream, that's Hare Creek. So the fish are just throw a line in and just come at you. Millions of them come after that line. So there's no problem catching fish. So we caught a lot of trout right away. And then we put them on a stick. And so I said, we better start moving down the river. And I never realized the meandering of the stream. So we were up there, I think 10 o'clock that night. We got home to Fort Bragg, or Noya rather. And I had no fish left because I was going through the brush. Kind of got scared, getting dark, real dark. And then I don't know how many times you fell in some, water pull up and, you get log jams. So you'd fall in there. Because it was getting dark, you couldn't see. So we were all soaking wet. And then, so I heard cars up there. So I went up there and it was Simpson Lane. So we walked back about 5 miles to Highway 1, and then I had to go all the way up to the Noya, over the Noya Bridge. But we had no fish, so my dad said, where's your fish? I didn't know what to say.
It's a fish story, yeah?
Yeah.
You had hundreds. You started with hundreds. One of the things Pat still does to this day is harvest acorns, and he and I have been talking about that. We both noticed there weren't many acorns up here last fall. I was looking for them, and so was he. And so we want to talk a little bit about acorns, Pat, and just generally maybe about the forests as well. You want to take that subject away?
Yes. Acorns is one of our main staples yet, although a lot of the younger people don't eat it like the older people did. But I still use it a lot, and finally I'm going to learn. This young lady's going to teach me how. I used to work for Department of Employment, so I sent her to school, to LVM school 45 years ago. Now she's 88 years old, so she's going to teach me how to make that acorn bread. So I'm still learning. So,
That's Cedar Hayes?
Yeah, Cedar Hayes. And but acorns were really plentiful one time, and then, of course, you read the history, you'll find out that they used that in San Francisco to the tanneries. That's what they used, that bark for the tanneries. So what they did when they were in forests, they were cutting down the great big acorn trees to get the bark off there. And there's pictures of, I have pictures, but I need to bring them with me, of rolls of acorn bark. I mean, rolls of it. It's like carpet. Probably, probably a good 100 yards of it. at Noyo, stacked down there, ship out to the sailing ships to take to the tanneries in San Francisco. So they kind of did away with affected our acorn trees, because they cut down all the big trees. See, at that time, I can remember I was a little small yet, 48 and 50, that we'd get on one tree and we could pick 4 or 5 hours and get a couple 100-pound sacks off of it. Because you can imagine how much acorn that was. That's a lot of acorn. And we sat there all day doing that. And that's why I'm saying when I start a granary, it's nothing to start it. Because people always ask me for acorns, and I have some, and like this last year, we're all hurt because there wasn't none available up here. At least I'm in some top secret areas, and I still couldn't find a handful or so, but say this was in a year. So hopefully this year is better. But what I want to do is eventually start a granary, and we had those before anything else was going on. In the old days, they would get the acorn, and they would build a thatch hut where they keep it dry at. Because see, they're weavers, so they make it really watertight. So they weave the willows together and make it really tight. And so the water didn't get into the nuts, because that nut will keep a couple of years if you keep it dry. And because they'll mold fast too. So I want to be able to put a granary in this. That's one of my pet projects I'm going to do this next year.
You want some help building a granary, Pat?
Yes.
Anybody want to help Pat with the acorn granary? Okay, Jason.
Good.
Let's hope we get some acorns.
Yeah. And then another thing, the acorns, of course we eat them, but we're also using for like in our regalia dancing. I don't know, you've seen our regalia dance, because we have it at Sherwood over here every year on a big time. And last year was July 18th, but the big time is open to the public. And what I do that time, I cook the fish traditionally on salmon on sticks, redwood sticks. You're probably thinking, why redwood sticks? Well, redwood sticks got no pitch. I use cedar, or I could use redwood, but we have redwood here, so not much cedar. So I use redwood sticks, about 3 foot high, and I put 4 stakes on each one of them, and then put manzanita wood down the pit, 3 by 3 pit, and 3 foot deep and 3 foot wide. And I have 100 sticks, so it gets about 20 foot long. And I used to use oak wood. And one year I ran out of oak wood, and I told my nephew, go on a hillside over there and chop down that manzanita. He says, it's not going to burn, Uncle. I says, do what I said. And I got it, and it burned. And it gave it like a smoke flavor. And so I've been using it ever since. I use all manzanita now. And it works out really good. It's hot fire, very hot. Fritz helped me last year, so he knows how hot that is.
What time of year do you do your salmon barbecue?
Last year was July 18th, but this year, whatever the date is, it's going to be about the 3rd or 4th weekend in July.
Are we all invited?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Got that? Mark it down. So let's see. Other inland food sources, wild foods. You want to talk? You mentioned manzanita. Talk about the food off the manzanita, maybe buckeye.
Yeah, the manzanita berries we eat. And I know I had one of my health drivers. He says, "That's poison." I said, "Why am I still alive then?" So we get those berries and we pick them and dry them, of course, and you can eat those things. They're really good. And then buckeyes. You see those on the tree, buckeye trees. Well, what that is, that's really poisonous. What you got to do on that, you get it, you pick it, and then you crush it up, and leave it in a burlap sack, and probably leave it in the creek there if you got a creek or something for running water for 3 weeks. And then you could take that and grind it up, and then it could be like a poi. If you've been to Hawaii, that poi over there, this is kind of like it. But it's good. It's really pretty good taste. But none of people know how to make it. Again, I'm going back to that young lady again, 80-year-old lady, to teach me how to do that.
All right, Pat, that's great. I'm going to take us now to the Persico family, and we'll come back to you later, Pat, and start mixing you in with some of the other conversation. But we have very lucky today to have Florence Prosecco here and her sons. And so I'd like to start by talking about your arrival to the Willits Valley. Where did you all come from? What made you choose Willits? Where did you settle in the valley? And Florence, first your family, the George Butt family. And of course, if you can't talk much, just make one of those boys talk about it. Yeah. So maybe you guys are going to have to decide who knows the most and fight over it.
You were born in Oregon, right? Oregon, you were born in Oregon. Oh, yeah. She was born in Oregon, and they came to Willits, and we were just doing some talking and listening to Pat, which was very interesting. Washington also.
For
Years. But she was born in Oregon, which was
Washington.
No, she was born in Oregon. Now we can argue.
They're going to do this all night.
Born in Oregon, but she lived most of her life most of the young life in Washington. And they moved to Willits, and we're just trying to think. I was just doing some calculations while Pat was talking there, and he's very interesting. I'm thinking that Mom came here about 1926, and she came to school here, and the reasoning that they came here to Willits was her dad was a jeweler, my grandfather, who had already passed before I was born, and going to school here, high school here, her and her siblings, where they lived in Willits was actually right in town, and the house is still standing. As a matter of fact, it's right across from the Country Skillet. There's a parking lot, and then their house. And she mentioned one morning at breakfast that that's where they rented when they lived here. And so anyway, Mr. Guslander, who was the watchmaker jeweler here in Willits, was needing of surgery or was ill, and he needed someone to fill his position for his business. And as I was saying earlier, back then, and most of the people here that I look at that I know the same things that I do, but the railroad ran, and the railroad had to have their watches set by a jeweler. They couldn't set them. And that was one of the things that the watchmaker jeweler responsibility was. You couldn't, like the time just changed this weekend, you had to take it to a jeweler to get that time changed because it had to be opened up. You could wind it, but you couldn't set it. And it was very important, of course, for the railroad to run on time and what have you. So that's when my mother came here, and my father met her at that time. But after that, they moved away. After Guslander came back, I don't know how many years you were here.
I don't remember. We were just kids in high school.
They were kids in high school, if you didn't catch that. And her dad wound up, they moved from here to Martinez. And he went to work down there for the basic same thing. He was a jeweler down there that was ill, and he worked at that business as well. Watchmaker and jeweler and engraver, because I know that.
Yeah.
Now there's a watch shop here in town, the Mysterious small storefront. I'm sure you all know about it. I've been in there a few times, and I'm hoping that someone would apprentice to that man and take that skill into the future. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. That's one of those little things I've got my fingers crossed about, but you can hear from this how it was more common to know how to take care of these watches, and it was more important back then. It was, a functionary. Probably every town would have one, a watch setter, a watchmaker, a watch repairman.
Jeweler, watch repairman, because wedding rings, people did get married and they did buy rings and stuff. So the jewelry and the watches were the only place you could get those things back then in those days was at a jewelry store. It's not like today where you can go to almost any store and buy a watch or ring or whatever.
So let's talk about Frank Prosecco. Who was Frank Prosecco relating to you, and what was he doing? How did he end up in Willits, his family?
He he came here in the early 1900s from Italy, and I'm not quite sure what brought him to this part of the area, but he came to San Francisco, and he had a lot of Italian friends there that I think were in the probably the brewery business and whatever. But anyway, he did come up here, and he worked for the railroad for a while. Then he worked for
Let's just talk a minute right there. What did he do for the railroad? Now, this is your grandfather, right?
He was instrumental, or well, he was on the crew that was building the railroads to the north, and as well as Highway 101. He then had a freight business, and there's pictures. I think you got pictures there used to be in the Loose Caboose, with my grandfather's team and his wagon backed up to the Travelers Hotel. In about 13 or maybe earlier, he bought the Hotel Italia, and it burned down in, I'm not sure the year, 14 or 15. And then he rebuilt the Travelers Hotel in 1915, I think it was.
This was on the site of the Rexall.
This is where
There was a
Rexall
hotel.
Drugstore is now.
1925.
No. 50. Yeah. Trust me. And I have, it's in my safe at home, and I probably should bring it out and take it down and have it photostated, put it in the museum. But I have the original contract that my grandfather had signed, and it was done on lined paper. And the last page, he said, I want the third floor to have electricity also. So I thought that was pretty interesting. At the time, I think the contract, if I remember my figures right, was like $12,500 to build a 3-story building.
So, Grandpa Persico, Frank, we're talking about, he had a lot of different jobs. I mean, he built rail. He did freight hauling. Talk about the freight hauling. Was he hauling freight in a big semi-truck?
No, in a wagon with a team of horses.
And what was he hauling?
Oh, he hauled, I'm not sure what he hauled. I'm sure
Lumber,
he hauled,
lumber and stuff,
lumber
and goods
feed.
to Covelo, because Covelo
Flour,
didn't have a mill.
salt,
Flour
yeah.
and goods to Covelo Valley.
So he ran from Willits to Covelo and back, short runs? How about the potatoes?
Short run for us, not a short run by team.
Okay, yeah. So would that be more than a one-day trip up to Covelo?
I would think that it was probably more like a 2 or 3 day,
Probably
maybe
a 3-day.
2 or 3 day run, because you're going up loaded. I think he brought back from up there. They had hops and things up there that they could use here, so it was a backhaul. You may use common knowledge today of backhaul. You need a backhaul. I think he brought stuff back from Covelo as well. Our grandfather, I didn't talk to Grandpa that much about what he used to do. My dad was the one that we got the information through.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if he had places to stay along the way? Would he camp out, or were there way stations?
No, there was stage stops.
Mm-hmm.
There was a stage stop at Eden Valley. There was a stage stop beyond down in the Covelo. Well, actually, when you got to Covelo, you were pretty much there. But I think there was another stage stop on this side. I'm sorry, it would be Hearst, and the wagon road actually meandered around through the creek, and I've lost it in some spots. But it actually, they have a spot on Eden Valley that's called the Stagecoach Road, and then it goes through the Eden Valley proper, and goes out over Salt Creek and then down to the ferry crossing. And the ferry crossing was just south of Covelo on the Eel River. And they had a humongous cable across. In fact, I think there's still a remnants of it, where they have to get the wagons on the raft and raft them across. But my grandfather also, when he was not doing that, he was putting up hay, and there's another old family that's been here as long as we have is the Pinches family, and Sully and Merv Pinches remembers my grandfather and his team, Jack and Queen, his 2 mules, and putting up hay in the fields down there. And I know that Stella knows where the fields were. They put up all the hay by the teams.
All right, those are the old days. So Let's talk about, little fast forward, about the P6 Ranch and the origin of that ranch, how you ended up there, about the horses, maybe? Talk about the horses.
The folks lived in at the hotel, actually, and this was before I was born. But we figured it out. It was 1941 when they...
Lee was 5 when we moved to the ranch.
1941.
1941, they moved out to the ranch, but before that, they had Lee being the world's youngest trick rider with a pony and the horses in town. It wasn't very accommodating for that style of life, and our dad worked on Ridgewood Ranch, or helped working down at the Ridgewood Ranch. We used to work at the Folsom Ranch, which when he was younger, but anyway, and Eden Valley as well. So he was always a horse lover and had horses, so the ranch became available through friends. I think it was a foreclosure on the ranch. Dutch Harms, I think, was the instigator. Mom wanted to move out. She liked it out there once she saw it. And Dutch Harms was a good friend of the family, close friend of the family, and talked my dad. Mom explained to him, Dutch, that he said, "You're going to have to talk Dad into buying that." So he did, and they bought the ranch in 1941 and moved out there from the valley.
Excuse me, but for those that don't know who Dutch Harms is, Dutch Harms was our local butcher and slaughterhouse operator, and where, you know where April Todell lives down on East Valley Street, that's the old slaughterhouse. And I can remember when we were small, that's where we took all our cattle in there, and they slaughtered them and they distributed them around to the local meat markets.
So that was a small slaughterhouse just for the valley people using it locally.
Yes.
I would think it got sold as a slaughterhouse. He could sell it. Probably didn't have the FDA regulations that you have today.
There wasn't a lot of regulations on anything we did.
Do you mind telling us how much that, what size is that ranch and how much it cost in 1941?
It was 220 acres, and I think if my figures are right, it was about $16,500, which was a lot of money then.
What was life like on the ranch for you boys? It must have been exciting to move out from town and to be out there, and you guys are building stock and learning how to do all these things. Talk about the stories you told me, some of the stories about driving equipment and that kind of thing.
Well, when we moved out to the ranch, of course, I was only 5 years old, but it didn't take me long to get to learn how to milk a cow and to feed the chickens. And in those days, we did whatever it took to survive. And I like to use the word sustainable yield is what we did. And we had chickens, pigs, turkeys, cows, sheep, and guinea hens, which would drive you crazy. But my dad had dogs, and of course he always had the horses, so he was off showing horses and breaking horses. And my job was like, I can remember, if I wanted 22 shells, which I think cost a nickel, I had to get off the school bus, change my clothes, and go down and shock the hay in the summertime and help bale the hay in the fall, and then we put it up in the barn, and of course we fed it out all winter. And those days, everything was done pretty much manual. We did finally get an upscale baler, and you have never lived unless you've worked on one of those balers, because you're sitting back there in all that dust, and it's jogging across behind a tractor, and the dust is so prohibitive you can't even see. But the wire, there's one guy on one side of the wire, the baler, and he pokes a wire through a block, and you pick up that wire and stick it back through the other side, and while the monkey arm comes together, it compresses, and you hope you get it tied right, and that's how you made your bales.
What I want to just comment on here, I really get this point that what they had was a 100% fully operating ranch, and I was teasing them earlier this week or last week about whether they raised everything you ate, or you remember buying salt and flour. You were pretty much self-sufficient, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had our own garden.
Yeah.
They,
Oh, yeah.
they
Yeah.
gardened, which is, it's, unfortunately, Willits Valley, a short gardening season, but I vaguely remember working in the garden. Weeding was one of my projects, but, we had the water overflow from the springs, and they had little ditches to irrigate. It was irrigation watering, which was actually overflow from the springs, and basically grew every vegetable that you'd want to be interested in, as well as potatoes. Grandpa used to have potatoes down, and he always put our grandfather, Dad's dad, Frank, would always grow some potatoes down on the bottom. And so we basically had everything. But as far as potatoes year-round, I don't know how, can't remember how far they went. I don't know that they would make it year-round, but
We had hay in the woodshed. And started.
As insulation for that.
So
for the
you
potatoes.
lay the potatoes into the hay in
Into
the
the hay.
woodshed? Is that what you're saying, Florence? I think she wants to weigh in on this gardening thing. You guys might not be
Yeah, because
telling
she
it
used to
right.
chase me when she couldn't get me to weed. He's
Okay.
better at that than I was.
Okay, so Chuck got stuck weeding. You were slower, Chuck? Are you going to take that?
he's 8 years older, so he's a lot faster. I can catch him now.
Okay, talk about a little bit about potatoes. That was interesting conversation earlier. That the potatoes and the alfalfa, how much they took out of the land, rotation, and all that.
Well, as Lee was mentioning earlier this week, our dad did have one corner of the property that was fenced off by itself, and he did plant, when I was young, some alfalfa. It wasn't irrigated like they do over in the valley and get several crops cuttings off of it. And I'm not sure if it was ever really produced enough to make it worthy of continuing, because I know I was fairly still pretty young when he stopped using it for that. But we didn't just use our fields as I was getting older. I remember us, Dad would share cut hay and crop hay from neighboring property, and we'd cut the hay and rake it and bale it and trade the owner of the property for half, or we could sell the other half, and then we did that for several years when I was growing up in high school age. The cow milking I also was involved in, and really when they first got out there, one of the things of the ranch, functions of the ranch, was they had actually like a little dairy. It was 14 head of cows they milked in the morning, and our dad's uncle, or our uncle, our dad's brother, younger brother, Uncle Pete, would drive out and help during the milking season, or milking days. But that became old because the bigger milkers, the bigger dairies took over, and it was it wasn't worth that much, and it was so hard to keep without it spoiling and having problems. I do remember there was a separator in the back.
We had those big cans.
Yeah, but that was when Buchanan had the dairy down there, and that's when the trucks were coming up. And when they stopped coming, it was harder for us to sell that milk. Right. That's when we got to crank the milk churn and make butter. Everything you do on a
You
ranch
separate it,
in those
separate.
days, you did by manual labor. So you got to crank the milk separator, and then you got the cream. You took it in there and skimmed it, and that's what we had on our Rice Krispies in the morning.
Was that your job, Florence, doing the butter
The milk.
and the milk? Was that something you did? Was the butter?
And here,
Was that something you did?
The milk.
You do the
Took care of
milk?
the milk and the butter.
yes. Oh, yes.
Lots of it, sounds like, with those boys.
We didn't. The butter that we took care of and stuff at the ranch was for our own family
I
use.
didn't sell it.
No, it wasn't for sale. It was hand crank, because I remember cranking that quite a bit, just to make the butter. And of course, then Mom worked the butter. But my grandfather on Dad's side lived right there, and my grandmother also. So there was another family there, and I believe Uncle Pete used to take some home. But there was enough milk with one cow, maybe even two. I think we only had one, though. Pretty much took care of the
Towards the
family.
end, there was only one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Talk for just a second about the idea of more than one family living together, sharing the work and the harvest with your extended family. Do you feel that that was absolutely essential for the survival of the ranch, or was it, you want to say anything about that?
He's talking about the group of the family.
Well, while he's discussing that with Mom, we would go help other neighbors. We've got some recent pictures that were given to us from the Coleman Ranch, and in those pictures is a picture of our dad behind a walking disc or plow, and behind him is Don Coleman, and behind him is our Uncle Pete. So it was a neighborly thing to get the ground prepared, and Dutch Harms was, well, he was getting shown how to run the mower, but not poo-pooing what he was doing, but I'm just saying they had to disc it, and it all had to be done by hand, or plow it and then disc it. And there's also a picture of our dad on top of this disc, and a big set of black horses, team of horses. So it was all done manual, but you were helping your neighbor. You weren't actually over there working for them and being paid for it. You did it as a neighborly thing. You helped out your neighbor.
Yeah,
and there was a lot of that, I think, when we were growing up, and it still happens a little bit today, but it was definitely important that you help your neighbor.
Yeah, and it didn't even have a name. I tried to get them to name this process, and all they could say was it's called helping the neighbors, and everyone did it. It wasn't about barter or any of that. It was just a gifting economy. So, Pat, I just want to come over to you a second and weigh in on this idea of living in housing that was not intended for just one family. Can you talk anything about your early memories or anything your grandma told you about the Pomo style of housing and shelter in the early days?
Yes. We, of course, we're weavers, so we weaved everything together, whether it's willows or tule, and so we make houses out of them. But there's a picture, but we didn't reproduced it. And by the way, the last elders talk, we were talking about that little boat they had here, and somebody's mentioned about that one. And I have some pictures back there with a full boat, and they were in San Francisco Bay. And that's important, because it shows you how mobile they were. I mean, they were out there meeting the Maoris when they came from Australia at that time. And I forgot who was talking. Someone in the community went there, and we were talking about seaweed and the different types of seaweed. Maybe that was you, Ann.
Are you talking about going down to that Thule boat exhibition?
No, when you went to Australia, where the Maoris were.
Oh, no, I wish I had. I didn't do that. But one thing Patrick was mentioning about the boat, who was here at the last Elder Talk and saw the boat? A few people. He said it's a toy boat. It was just built for display, and that it wouldn't really have made it out in the ocean. So what you saw last time, don't build one of those. And but I do want to talk about the shelters. So you had the longhouses with several families living in there.
Yeah, there were multiple numbers of families living in them. There were huge thatch houses made out of tule or willow, but they were very big. Well, compared to what you ever see, like a little slab house or something. These things are like 20 or 30 foot long and that same width. And people, multiple families that live in there, the same families, would live in there, and they grew a lot of those things, made a lot of those things around. People would. Then of course we used the slab houses too from the bark of the trees. But I think the thatched ones were much better looking. But I wish I would have attached some time and made a picture of that. In fact, there is that booklet he was reading from.
The one of your magazines?
No. But he has I showed you the picture, but I don't know if it came on reproduction or not.
Of the house?
Yeah.
We did use it on the poster.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, you were going to make a big shout of that, RJ, that house didn't happen. Yeah. Okay, then, shelter. So any other comments from the Persicos on multifamilies sharing parcels of land, working together?
It still happens. Two friends, not as far as living on their property or anything, but as far as still helping. I mean, we go out and help other people do their marketing and branding today. The neighborly thing was just the way, and we were raised that way. I remember our dad, we used to go help gather cattle that were having a hard time being gathered, and when we were kids, was Ralph Whitaker, right? That we went down on the Ridgewood Ranch, and in the back he had some cattle that were pretty tough to get in. He not feeling well, and so he talked to our dad, and so Lee and myself and Ralph and Dad went out, and we brought dogs down, and it took us a while, but we got them in, and almost killing a dog or two right at the corral. And once we got in there, we were finally got whatever head we could get in. We had quite a few, I remember right, and we went to get off our horses to walk over. He was going to give us something for lunch, and these cattle would take you. I mean, that's how. I've never seen cattle like that in my life. They were just rank cattle, and anyway, we did that and still do that as far as I'm concerned in today's life. But as far as making a living at it, you can't really per se make a living at it.
Yeah, now let's talk about, now you didn't tell me the year, but the price of sheep. Remember you guys were selling sheep, and then some New Zealand sheep came in. Who wants to talk?
Remember this, that was one of the things we had was a lot of sheep, and I think my dad was selling them for like $25 or $30, wasn't very much, but it seemed like overnight the New Zealand market hit, and the sheep went to, I think, $3, and so they weren't worth turning out. Am I right? Yeah, well, it ain't much better. Yeah.
So was that in the 50s? Was that 1950s?
That would be probably in about early 50s,
late 40s.
Yeah.
Early 50s.
So we're talking about an era of really cheap fuel, cheap enough you could bring an entire sheep over from New Zealand and then sell it for $3, compared to $30, $25 or $30 for a local head of sheep. So it killed sheep ranching around here. What do you think about that, Helen? Look at you. Yeah, so
there used to be a lot of sheep in this country.
Between Boonville and, Boonville was big sheep country, still is in some areas. A lot of predators now, too, but I remember fighting out in the valley here. They had a liver fluke that the sheep would get, which we pilled them and did everything. Eddie knows what I'm talking about. It's trying to keep them alive. They look good. They look healthy, but the next thing you know, they pass too. So there was also the liver fluke that you get in the valley because the sheep do eat so close to the ground. They pick it up that way. Cattle don't seem to get it, but they can get it also, depending on how bad the feed gets and stuff. So the feeding period was, and the reason for all the haying is for the amount of cattle that Dad ran. And I was told this when I was a young man that, I had a love-hate thing that living at the ranch. I loved the horses, I loved the hunting, and I loved a lot of it, but I didn't always like all the jobs that came along with it. Today I'm thankful for all the memories and stuff that I learned there, but Dad told us when I was very young that don't ever plan on making a living here. You're going to have to make your living on the outside. The ranch was never going to be. And our ranch, I would say, was very fortunate. We had the rock quarry, which we sold rock often for years. And they were selling rock, I think, before we actually moved out there. Sold it till recently. But anyway, because of problems, environmental. But anyway, everything that we did out there was to just to survive, keep the payments going. I mean, you could sell enough cattle, sell enough sheep to make payments and keep the ranch paid for, but Dad had to work off the ground, off the ranch area even when I was growing up. And our Uncle Pete had a gravel plant here in town and did a lot of the bridges, had a pile driver and a crane, and he used to clean the mill ponds and drive piling, and my dad worked with our uncle. Uncle Pete had one other employee, I think, other than Dad, but they worked together throughout most of the 50s up into the 60s. So
That other employee was me at 12.
But I remember some of you know George Rimstead. He used to work there, and Mel used to work there for Uncle Pete. But he had also a hot plant there. I mean, he had basically everything at the plant, which is now where Schuster's is, and he could make asphalt, and he paved most of the streets. And Dad said he built all the bridges in the town. So some of the piling is still there. I know behind Vassar's Pizza, they have a sinkhole going on there, and they were asking me about it, and I said, well, my uncle drove all the piling along the creek there to keep that creek from washing, and I think that's the Willits Creek that comes down from Brook Trails area.
So there was one of you made a semi-famous quote here. I liked it. I wrote it down, that ag buys at retail and sells at wholesale.
That's right.
Was that you, Jack?
No, that was
Lee. You want to say anything more about that?
No, you just everybody that's here that's in agriculture realizes that you buy everything at retail and sell everything at wholesale. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it is.
So these guys worked really hard. They did, making that happen. Wow.
Well, let's do it this way. Growing up on the ranch at the time, like Chuck said, was a pain in the butt. But, you know, as I look back, we were very fortunate to have that environment. And unfortunately, that as I look around with the young people that we have today, they don't have the same principles and background. And I think that stems to where a lot of our problems are with our younger generation. I'm not poo-pooing the younger generation, but I think that, you know, they just didn't have the opportunities that we had. So even though it was bad, or we felt it was bad growing up, it was a blessing. And as I look back, I wish I could go back and relive it. Maybe not work as hard.
I have a few specific questions just wanted to cover. Talk about water. Talk about maybe the feeling about water in the valley, that there was plenty of it or not. And tell me about your spring. It was kind of interesting how the ranch got its water.
Well, one of the things that when my folks were looking at the ranch, I don't remember how many ranches were for sale at that time when this one came up, but the one thing that we have, and we're very, very protective of, is that we have a tremendous source of water that comes from underground springs up on underneath the Hirsch Road, or the Red Hill Road, and as people are now starting to realize that water is a thing that's going to be more valuable than oil, and we need to protect it and do what we can to preserve it. But that was one of the things that made our ranch as productive as it was in those days. It could still be productive, but the cost of the irrigation that we would have to set up, the pipes and what have you, for what we could get in return is pretty limited. But the pond that a lot of people drive around the valley, the pond that everybody sees and I hope enjoy, is all runoff, and that's all excess water after we've taken all the water that we need for our own use. And it goes back into that pond, which then goes down into the creek, which ultimately ends up in the Eel River. So we try to make sure that it's recycled and done right, even though I'm a little concerned with some of this environmental stuff that I don't know whether I can live up to. But anyway, that's to me, that's what makes our ranch is the water that we have.
And Patrick, can you weigh in on water from your point of view with how you remember it? How did people care for the water, and where did it come from?
Well, we had some springs that we'd get our water from, and they were really important springs. And wherever we went, we knew where the springs were. And but I could see the big change of a period of time all the pollution and things that's taken place. And like we used to eat watercress, you don't hardly see that anymore.
We
That,
still have that. We still
some
have
places,
it
yeah,
at the
that's-
ranch.
very few places have it anymore. But that was something good to eat. And but no, you don't see all that stuff anymore. Just whole things have changed. Mainly it's due to the no umbrella anymore. That means the trees are all logged out or whatever, cut down, so they can't hold in water anymore. That's what people haven't figured out.
Okay, so the forest was helping us keep our water, and we're losing our forest. That's what I heard you say?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Okay, Ben. And what about the pollution? How do you know? I mean, I have watercress down behind my house. It's a beautiful little spring. It's almost year-round coming out of the hill, and right at the bottom of it is watercress, but I'm like afraid to eat it because I feel like the spring is polluted, might be giardia or something. And is watercress a sign of a healthy water, or is it? Do you know anything about that? Any of you guys?
I wouldn't be afraid to eat the watercress out of our creek, and Mom used to make a watercress salad even, and put it in with salad. The spring is right below the Hearst Road. That is the upper part of the ranch, and I'm sorry I'm turning that way because I'm pointing that way. There's runoff off of Hearst Road. So actually there could be problems there, but
It doesn't run into the spring.
but the county has culverting on either side of our spring area. So we don't really get that much, but there is some that comes out there. But I wouldn't be afraid to eat it, no. To answer your question. Do you have watercress out there, Eddie? No?
Did you want to say something, Patrick?
Well, I wouldn't know what to do. I'd get it tested first, I think, before I'd eat it. Because, see, what is it, 1950s, they start spraying the oaks to kill the oaks. That didn't go away. That's still in the water out there, still in the ground, So that hasn't leached out yet. I don't know how many years it takes to do that, but I think it's still around. And that's what you got to worry about with what the modern techniques they use, and especially when they get some pesticides and things in there, how long it's going to stick around. But if I'd get it tested before I do anything like that anymore.
Speaking of pesticides, sensitive subject, I suppose, but when you guys bought the ranch in 1941, it was pre-World War II, and as far as I know generally, and Jason might be able to correct me on this, there really wasn't a lot of pesticide use till after the war. So a lot of those things were developed in the 40s and became popular in the 50s. Do you remember anything about that, about how things were growing in your garden, like before and after? I mean, you were really, of course, Chuck, you were too young maybe, but what about you, Lee? Any memories about that?
Well, I think we had, I don't remember what kind of pesticides we had, but my Italian grandmother was pretty much tended that garden, and as Mom did, and they seemed to have a green thumb, and whatever they did seemed to work. But yeah, we ended up with some pesticides. I think at one time we had DDT, just like everybody else. We used to spray our cows with a copper tox, which would kill the lice, which is banned now. We used bluestone that we put in the creeks to get rid of the liver fluke, and I think a lot of that stuff that we used is probably banned, and we don't use it. But now what I do with the cows is I just try to vaccinate. I try to vaccinate as minimal as I can, because there's a lot of talk, and you've been reading about the organic beef as well as organic foods, and I have some friends that are now putting the chip in their ear so they can actually track this animal from a calf up to the time it gets to the slaughterhouse. And on this computer chip, it'll actually tell you, I don't remember now if it tells you exactly when it was born, but it'll tell you just about, if you've done everything right, it'll tell you whatever range that calf or cow or animal has been on. So if you've moved them from leased fields or your home fields to other fields, you can track that. Also, the way we vaccinate today is different than we used to vaccinate. As I say, I try to limit mine to just the bare minimum, but just enough to keep my cattle alive, because in the valley here, one of the things that's very difficult, also with sheep, is that we have the warm days and the cold nights, and there's a lot of sub-irrigation, and that's why you have the valley fog. That's kind of unique here. And we're very fortunate. We live on a hill that we can look down, and it's almost surrealistic sometimes, and it looks like Scotland sometimes in the morning, because that fog is just a haze down there. But the cattle have a tendency, because they're laying on the ground at night and get cold, and then they're hot, they'll have contract pneumonia. And there's basically two kinds of pneumonia. Both are pretty much fatal if you don't catch them. One the 24 hours and one the 3 day. So you've got to kind of pay attention. And actually, my cattle seem to be more susceptible to that, our cattle, more so in the August, September area when it's hotter, rather than the wintertime. I don't know if that answers your question to all the sprays and stuff, but I thought I'd get into the vaccination.
I'll bet you get a lot of questions at the end about all this detail work. Be ready. Let's segue into medicine. There's a funny story, family story, not funny maybe, but interesting story about your dad getting hurt at a rodeo, and what kind of medical care was available in the Willits area. Who told me that story? Was that you, Chuck?
Possibly, yes. Dad was rodeoed quite a bit before he started raising his family. Other than roping, I don't remember Dad doing any bronc riding or anything like that. But before we were born, before I was born, he got bucked off at a rodeo here, and on his way to the ground, or maybe on his get off, the horse broke his jaw. And at that time, which had to be 30s, I guess, before Lee, probably before you were born.
Yeah.
The only hospital was the Brook Trails, or the Diamond D Mill at Brook in Sherwood, and they had the basic or the biggest medical facility because of all the size of the mill and people getting fingers cut off and everything else during the processing of timber and lumber. So that was really the biggest medical facility around. And Dad remembers being up there and being put out, and his mouth being wired shut. He still had x-rays of all that. But 1926, this was when the hospital was built. And C.S. Howard's son was, as we all know the story, was unfortunately killed, and Dr. Babcock was a good friend of C.S. Howard and said that, I probably could have saved your son had I had a better facility. And with the friendship that they had, that's what instigated C.S. Howard he came up and bought the property where the hospital is now, and built the hospital. And he said to the community, here it is, but you're going to have to put the beds and equip it and finish it. And that's when Willits Frontier Day started, and that was 1926.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Babcock's surgery. Before the hospital, his office in town was kind of the place people went. And just describe your feelings about going there.
I didn't go there, but I remember Jane, his daughter, and a lot of you know this, some don't, but Dr. Babcock's front part of his house, Jane would say, Mom and I wouldn't even go up there because it was like the ER room, and it was where everybody came with broken arms, broken limbs, cut off fingers, whatever had been mutilated, and that was the front area. He actually worked right out of his house there on Humboldt Street.
On the porch. He used to operate on the porch.
Operate on the porch. So there probably wasn't too many things to numb the pain at that time, but those are just things that happened. That's the way it was. And Dr. Babcock delivered Lee and myself, and I think 1, 2 or 3 of yours.
3 of our children.
Three of them. 3 of them before he passed.
I know,
So.
the boss lady knows that one.
So 2 of our generation he delivered.
And then Dr. Myers took over for, actually was serving as apprentice from Dr. Babcock. And he delivered the last 2, right?
Yeah.
So just to talk a little bit about the rodeo, because I don't know if you're familiar with this family of rodeo fame, actually. Madison Square Garden, your dad went there. You want to just brag about your dad a little, and then maybe whoever wants to brag about Lee, if you're willing to do it yourself, or if Chuck's going to, tell us about your Ripley's record. Can you guys want to talk about that rodeo a little?
Well, my dad, our dad rodeoed quite a bit, and I remember, in fact, I've got some cards that I think he sent to Uncle Pete from Madison Square Garden, but my dad was actually more involved with racehorses and what have you, as well as the rodeo. But one of his claims to fame was that he could he used to Roman ride. And in the old days, they used to have these, when we had the original rodeo grounds, before they put the track in, they would have these horses tied together, and they'd Roman race, which is 2 horses in tandem, and you're standing on their back, and you're going around the track, and you're racing. So it was quite interesting, as well as dangerous, but he was pretty proficient at that.
Wasn't pari-mutuel at that time. There was a little betting in the stands, I'm sure, though.
But one of the old friends that I ran into, and it's been probably 25 years ago, came up to me and he said, "Is your dad named Dink?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "I got a picture that I'm going to give you," and we do have it. And he said, this guy's name was Benny Myers, and his good friend at the time was Jimmy Milrick, and they were from down in the I don't know, probably Livermore area. But anyway, they both worked on this, and I think Jimmy was a jockey or a practice boy. Anyway, they used to, when the boss would leave, they'd grab their better racehorses, and they'd come up through these little fairs and rodeos. And in those days, most of these rodeos, including Coblo, had racetracks, and that was quite the thing. Anyway, Benny was telling me, he says, "Yeah, we'd come along and we'd match our horses with these podunk dudes up here in these backwoods towns, and we usually beat them." And he said the only place we ever got beat was in Willits, and he says, "I think it was your dad." So the picture I have is my dad beating him, and Jimmy Milrick in a bad second. But anyway, he said that's the last time they ever came to Willits with racehorses.
Well, it sounds like a transportation segue to me. I'm just going to take one more question here, and then we'll throw it out to you guys to be thinking about if there's something you have been wanting to ask these people. Let's just ask you about the railroads. Patrick, starting with you, do you remember anything about the trains or the railroads? Did you ride the train between Fort Bragg and Willits ever? Anything about rail at all?
Yes, the skunk train. I would ride the single car one, the real skunk train. And you know how they got that name, right? The field smell. Yeah, that's what they smell, like a skunk. So they had a little skunk. That's a little single engine one. And it wouldn't go very fast, but I'd drive right out to Glen Blair and get off there and fish. And then when they come back, I'd get on and come back home. Didn't lose my fish that time, though.
Right, yeah, you can carry more fish on the train than on your back through the brush. It's a good reason why they were invented, those trains. And anything else about trains? Anybody want to weigh in on remembering the rail?
The only thing I can tell you about it is that I remember that this was kind of the turnaround section, and the trains would come up from Shelville to Willits. They had the roundhouse down here, and if those of you can remember, it was quite an operation down there, and they took those engines in and they put them on at the roundhouse, and it would turn that track and turn the engines around. And our cousin, Edie's brother, God, I don't know how many years Frank ran the train, but he was one of their head engineers for years. In fact, he was in one of the major wrecks, I think, here on the Ridgewood Ranch. Yeah. Who
was that? And tell us about when the wreck was. Frank
Ricano, our cousin.
And there was a wreck on the Ridgewood grade?
Right. And it killed, I think it killed the other engineers, but he was very fortunate.
Well then. I guess I do have one last question. Why are you boys still in Willits? Why did you stay in Willits rather than go away? Any reason why you stayed here?
The love of the land, love of the people. I mean, everybody here, basically, we know, or they know us. And that feeling, it's like family. You can't get that anywhere else. You went to school with, I have classmates out here I can see.
I have an algebra teacher out here.
that you've been raised with. It's like it's just part of your family. And that is the big thing. It's also the freedom that you have up here too. You can still get out in a few minutes and be out into the country, and but definitely the family life. It's just like an extended family, and you just love them all. And I couldn't believe living anywhere. I went to college away from here, and Napa was a very nice community. They treated me very nice while I was there. I went to junior college there. I went to San Luis at Cal Poly for a while, and I had my grandmother, mom's mother, lived there, and my great aunt, and I actually was able to live with them. Thank goodness I did those few years that I went there. And you always want to come back here. Some of you left and come back. Some of you never left, and I'm just one of the fortunate ones that I'm just glad I'm still here. Tough to make a living.
Lee, you want to have the
Well,
last word?
I kind of did the same thing when I graduated. I ended up going to college actually it was a trade school in Los Angeles, and I studied commercial art. And we're kind of freeloaders because I had an aunt down there, and I lived with her with family. So yeah, we scheduled where we were going by relatives. It's called existence with no money. But anyway, then I came back and went to work in a sawmill. In fact, Fritz and I worked together for a while, and then I got a job with PG&E, and I met my wife. And I have a story about my wife that I love to tell, because when I moved back from down there, my friend, or our mutual friend, which was Mary Ann Rimstead, told me that, she said, I want you to meet my roommate. She said, I think you guys would get along real well. And I said, well, where's she from? Well, she's from Oregon. Her dad's a logger. And I'm thinking, logger? Well, he's probably making a lot of money. Those days, they were drilling for oil out at the ranch. And, of course, they didn't hit any. And, of course, she thought we were wealthy with oil rigs. So we got together, and we both got screwed, but we're still together. I don't know if you could put that in the
terminology. Bleep that one, please.
But in June, I've been married to Evelyn for 50 years. So.
Florence, you didn't really get to say much tonight. Did these guys tell the truth?
Yeah. I'm not saying anything because I'm forced.
Yeah.
Did we tell the truth?
All right. And,
Close.
Get 'em.
And Patrick, I'll ask the same question of you. You stayed around this area, this county, this town. Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I kind of stick around here Well, I was going for about 20 years when I was getting my education in Sacramento, and I traveled throughout the state of California, and I worked for Intertribal Council of California, so I became an environmental planner. So I got to see up and down the state, all over from Oregon border to the Fort Yuma Reservation, clear down southeastern California. So I traveled all over Indian country for 20 years. And then when I came back home, I worked with these guys, friend Ben Shawnigo with Shawnee Construction. And then I got sick in '98, and I had a tumor removed, and that disabled me. And they asked me, so the psychologist said, where do you live? I said, Fort Bragg, Noyo. Where do you live? And it kept going over and over. I was getting mad, you know. And I didn't know I lived in Willits because I was, lost my memory in the operation. And come back from there was just unbelievable. And anyway, I did it, and still around, still kicking. And but I've been with Indian Affairs, and I want to develop these people here. And sometimes I get a lot of resistance. So believe it or not, I get a lot of resistance from my own people. Like they're jealous, because of my education. I worked for it. I tell people my buttock marks are still in the library, the oak chairs at UC Davis yet. That's how you have to get graphics sometime and tell them.
To understand.
Yeah.
All right. Let's have some questions. Is there a mic we can run into the audience? And got the Jerry Springer Act with
Turn it up a little bit.
Richard Jurgensen version.
Okay, let's take them right here. We'll do a little Jerry Springer style.
I wonder if the Persicos would say something about the Catholic community. I know that Florence was a devout Catholic. She played the organ and sang, and I just want to know something about the social life of the Catholic community and the other churches, maybe. Leah had mentioned that the young people seem to have no example or something to live for, and that would be part of what's missing today. And also, Dink was a very good baseball player, and baseball was a serious game between towns. Maybe you'd say something about it.
Do you want to speak on that? He's talking about the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Well, what I do know is St. Anthony's turned 100 years old in 2004. And I got thinking back at when Mom had started and when Mom quit playing. And she had started, or she played actually 60 years of the 100 years. So the church was only 40 years old when she started playing there and played that entire time, which is quite phenomenal. I think it's a dedication. She didn't just play for the Catholic Church. She told me there was times where she would go to our Mass and then come back and go to the Methodist Church and play because their organist was sick or something and help them out. So she played actually in more than one church when we were younger, the Baptist as well, she said. And but as far as growing up Catholic, we were altar boys, both of us. Lee taught me because he's 8 years older and he could go hunting, and I was only 7. So overnight I learned Latin so I could serve the next morning. That's called a rush or get her done because he's going to go hunting. And I made some mistakes, of course, at 7 years old, but I made it through and was an altar server till I was 18. I used to come back from school in Napa and serve altar. Jim and Warren Lewis were 10 o'clock with the Sieberts. There was a lot, I think, when you go to church today at our Catholic church, there's a lot of gray hair there. There's the younger generation, unfortunately, in Willits, where I said it was hard to make a living. We've kind of lost, and not all families, but a lot of us have lost that next generation because there's not enough work here in the valley to keep us around. So the parish itself is doing all right. In the Anglo, the Hispanic is doing excellent, and they're a very strong part of our church. What was the other question, Ray? You said baseball. Oh, the baseball. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, my dad was very into baseball, and of course, a lot of you people still probably go up to Laytonville to the old timers game, but that was kind of the big thing growing up. Baseball was kind of the communities getting together more so than they are now. But Basilio Quadrio, the Quadrios that had the Quadrio store down there, was played, and Spunk Endicott, and God, I can't remember all of the guys, but I can remember traveling up to Laytonville and to to Covelo. We played up in Covelo. We played at Talmadge when it was the mental institution, and it was quite a thing. And of course, they caravaned just like they did during the pre-rodeo days, which they would take a group and they'd caravan to different towns. But my dad was always very involved with baseball. And while we were altar boys, I wanted to go back to Father Quinlan was the Catholic priest at the time, and many of you maybe know or don't know, but when Red Pollard, who was the jockey for Seabiscuit, when he got married in the Catholic Church here, and Father Quinlan was the priest that married them.
You said that you lived on a bare, meager subsistence and such. How did the war or the Depression, the Great Depression, affect your lives here in Willits, or did it really affect it that much?
Mom can't hear you, but one thing about only the ranch, and I do know that, like the gas rationing, it wasn't a problem because it was ag related, and so I mean I'm not saying we got excess gas, but I do remember that we were able to purchase gas or the needs of the petroleum product.
We had the coupons, the little coupons. But when you're talking
because
about
of the ranch,
you're talking about the Depression. That was before. That was in 29. So we had the ranch after that. So we were coming out of the Depression. I don't mean to make it sound like it was meager. We were self-sufficient, so we had everything that we needed, and we could share with the neighbors as they needed it. And when the dentist, Dr. Watson, bought the west side of the Littlefield Ranch, which was also a dairy, he had a water problem, so he'd come down and get water from us, and so we just all shared together. But it wasn't as meager as it sounds. It's just that we grew and ate pretty much off the ranch.
What we did learn, which our dad taught us, and which is one of our downfalls, is the Depression. You don't throw anything away, and we unfortunately still have a lot of stuff that Dad had. And then, unfortunately, because that's our nature, we're still doing the same thing where we are. And it was brought to them. I mean, that was what they had to do. You had to make do with what you had. I do know that Dad would loan plows and discs to neighbors and things like that during those times. But naturally, we're both too young to actually remember. But I can definitely say that not throwing things away and trying to use whatever you have. Dad could make something work out of nothing. We actually didn't have a welder or anything, but if you needed a bolt, you went and got it off of something else, and hopefully you didn't break it getting it apart because it's been rusted on there for years, but you need it for over here and to make this work. And so it was, that all, if you think about it now, taught us a lot of deal with what you have and make it work and make it function, or try to.
I can guarantee we weren't in a throwaway society. I'm still throwing away bent nails.
This question is for Patrick. Could you please talk a little bit about the medicinal herbs or the medicinal, what you use for medicines, if you can remember?
I'm not too much into that, but I I use some things today yet, like the Angelica root. I picked that you do it right now. See, it's like seasonal. You do it now because it's coming out now, and we cut that up and use it for tea. But it's like a good luck thing. You know, you take it with you when you travel, and it kind of protects you. But there are many plants. I just don't know how to use them. I don't want to, because some, like I said, are pretty potent. You know, you get poisoned or something. So you get. Well, anyway, in '98, when I had a brain surgery, and I coded twice, and I was in there for 31 days, and I got a real bad bed sore in my back. And I could hear that I was in a coma. I heard the doctors talking about it, and so my daughter brought me home here to Willits, and so she took me to Howard Hospital, and the doctor said that'll probably take 2 or 3 months to get well. So she went did another resource that I told her about years ago. It's called this lady in Manchester over there, Florence Silva is her name, and she's really a good herbalist. I mean, tremendous. And so she made some things up for me in 1 week, and I was healing already. So that's what I used. It healed me right away. I mean, it was like 4 inches wide and about a foot long. Real bad. And 'cause I could hear the doctors talking about it, but I was in coma. You know, I don't care what anybody says. When you're in coma, whoever is in a coma knows what's going on. Maybe can't react to that, but they know what's going on.
I think this is a question for Patrick. You mentioned acorns and other wild things and the seaweed. What about mushrooms? I moved here and I fell in love with wild mushrooms. And then this year there's been nothing. I wonder if you have any experience with mushrooms and if you have an opinion about what are the conditions that made the mushrooms almost non-existent this year?
Well, I know a little bit about it. I'm not a specialist, but it's how you pick them. You know, if you pick the whole thing out of the ground, what's going to grow? Nothing. And that's what they do. You know, and I don't know what's going on with the weather, but it's really it's changing. A lot of things are changing, and I don't know much of that at all. It's like the acorn was. I know acorns go dormant every 2 years, not one area, but it goes dormant for 2 years. And but it's having an effect on other different native vegetation too. See, I didn't talk much about anything because I didn't know how much time we have. But like, you know, if you look at our culture, our baskets, we pick those certain places. The red bud, certain times of year, like winter time.
I used to pick mushrooms all the time.
And then if you get them like red bud over there in Lake County, and you get red bud in Red Bluff, big difference because they got snow up there, and we don't have snow down here, so it's a better red bud. I learned that from my grandmother. I didn't know why. She said, get the ones up there. And I said, but I got all these. She said, well, that's no good. She said, get those other ones up there. So I'd have to go back and get them. Don't argue.
Our grandmother used to pick mushrooms. And there's hill mushrooms, there's field mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
The button ones, I think they're usually out around the cow manure and that kind of thing. That's a good fertilizer for them. But there's a lot out in the field. They call field mushrooms. They're the little button one. The ones in the hills, I never learned, but Frankie Porro, who used to be here for years, and Ernie, they seem to know which ones to go get. And then we had a cousin Aunt Louise, come up, and she would go up and go mushroom picking at the right time. But it depends on the weather. It depends on how much rain you get and how much you're going to receive, how many you can get. But I remember a grandmother also drying them, and she'd dry them and leave them in a brown paper bag, and she'd have them hanging out on the porch, covered, but just screened. And she just, whenever was cooking something and wanted mushrooms, just reactivated them. That wasn't a dryer like you have now, but she dried them and used them year round.
One other thing you guys never asked is about how do we keep our no refrigerators, no electricity, how do we keep our food? We never talked about that, but I can remember having burlap sacks and then digging a hole 3 or 4 foot deep and wet those sacks, and that would keep our food down in there and keep it cool.
In the house at the ranch was what they call a cooler. And we had the cooler.
Yeah.
And what it was an opening from the floor to the attic. And the shelving was just a screen. So things you wanted to keep just cool or that would make it. And then Mom used to make cakes with duck eggs. We had ducks also. So to keep the duck eggs fresh, she put them in water glass. And so then throughout the year, in a crock in the cooler. And so whenever she would want to bake a cake, because duck eggs seemed to make them rise better, is that?
No, they were bigger.
Bigger. They were bigger, but they rose good too. I remember they were very good cakes. I remember all the birthday cakes. But of course, the duck egg, just to eat it, has a little bit of a different flavor, like a turkey egg has a little bit different. And it really wasn't my favorite. I think Grandma, your mom, Grandma Butt, used to like to eat turkey eggs and the different ones, but she liked cab brains too. I didn't mind them. Lee wouldn't eat it.
The acorns you were talking about, did you have a preference? There's a dozen kind. Preference of acorns that you used?
A what?
Acorns.
Acorns
Oh,
for you,
for
Patrick.
Pat.
What kind of acorns
For Pat.
do you like?
We didn't use acorns though.
Tan oak is the best, the
Tan oak.
sweetest. And then, we'd get the black oak and white oak too. The rest of them are kind of like mush oak. They're not a very good nut. And but tan oak was the
Tan
one.
oak was a preference?
Yes, still is with me.
Why?
It tastes the most sweetest.
The black oaks are kind of bitter.
Yeah, well, you leach them both. They both could be leached. And it matters how you do that. Well, I grind it up, crack them and take the husk off and let them dry there for a week or two. And I get these little boxes from the store, where your sodas come in, little cases. It's the bottom of those. I throw 2 or 3 layers of acorns in there, let them dry. So I got a whole bunch of those boxes to let them dry, and I know when I'm doing it. And then I grind them up. And I'm ashamed to say I use modern technology, blender. And the other ones are just too hard to doing it the other way. Very difficult. And so after I do that, then I leach them. And I let my faucet drip into a pan in a sink, again modern, in a probably about a 400 count fabric, and a white one, and you put the acorn in there, say, only 2-3 handfuls. So just make about half of what a strainer, say that is about that tall, make about half of it. And you put that in there and let the water drip, and fill it up first, mix it up, and then let it drip the rest of the night. And I let it go for 24 hours. I have no problem in it from being strong or bitter, and it comes out sweet.
Patrick's doing a workshop in the fall on acorns, if we should be so lucky as to have some. So on the back tables, there's a couple sign-up sheets, one for acorns, and that will, of course, be a long time from now. And then there'll be another sign-up sheet next to it for harvesting seaweed. So on your way out, if you're interested in the more practical aspects, you can get in touch with Patrick about that.
Wrote music, so it was a younger brother, not the youngest of the family, but also her sister, Vivian,
An artist.
was not only an artist, but she played the piano as well. But she didn't play at the church or anything, but she played, and they used to sing together. They were called the Butt Sisters, And they sang together and harmonized, and every time we would go down to visit my aunt, they'd strike up the piano and sing together, and it was very good. Uncle Freddie, I don't remember if he sang. I don't know if he sang, but I know he played the violin and actually did write music.
Any grandchildren that play music?
Well, she's got Michael that plays the guitar, the youngest out of Lee's family, and my kids both learned to play the piano, but they don't play anymore.
So it's Florence's bedtime. Is there any other questions?
One last
before she
question,
has to go?
What'd she say?
I was just curious about the weather changes and if you've noticed a lot from when you grew up. If there was more rain in the summertime, like more passing shower type stuff, and just different weather patterns that maybe you've noticed over your lifetime here in the Willits area.
Can you speak to that? Weather change?
No. Too young.
Yeah, you want me to tell you about weather? Well, yeah, what we used to say when I was young was there's only a fool or a newcomer that would try to guess the weather in Willits, because you just honestly can't. It changes every year. Some years you have more water. We had flooding in 54. We had flooding in 63. That was a 10-year cycle that we had there going for a while. And the flooding end of it, we didn't flood the ranch, but we had problems because of the water, as everybody else did. And 101 used to flood over, which all the highway used to go around Reynolds Highway. We were fortunate the way our ranch is located. We have enough hill ground that the cattle weren't in any threat or anything, but the lower valleys where we hayed in the summer, the Littlefield Ranch and Hanson's, that all pretty much floods out in the wintertime. But we see that today. To tell you that it's a lot different. Our summer's hotter. They are maybe because I'm older. I don't know that for a fact, but they seem hotter, but I don't know. But it also seems colder when it gets cold, so it could be the age thing slipping in. When I was young, it didn't seem to matter. But has it changed? I just think it's just part of what goes on. What's going on?
It hasn't changed.
Florence, you get the last word. Is there anything you'd like to say? You didn't get to talk much tonight.
No. I've got this cold. I can't talk.
We're going to have to get Florence on camera in a private video session so she can talk and tell some of these stories. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff we got missed. So I am going to have the last word, I guess. This is a poem written by Larry Robinson, the mayor of Sebastopol, and it kind of speaks to what we're about here with the Elder Talks. It's called "The Time Has Come, Roll Away the Stone." This fecund earth has lain covered long enough. It wants to throw off its asphalt blankets, stretch and yawn and send forth 10,000 blades of grass. Behind their dams, rivers dream of the sea. They yearn to burst their bonds and run wild, to feel the caress of the banks and beyond, to sing their ancient songs of joy and abandon. Something has been calling to you. Something has been calling to you for longer than you can remember, calling you to step out into the light, into your life. It doesn't matter whether you think you're ready or not. The time has come. Roll away the stone. Roll away the stone. And so tonight, we honor these people who remind us of a time when the rivers ran wild, and perhaps we will help that happen again. Let's give them all a hand. I didn't get the last word. Patrick wants to say one more thing.
Before you leave tonight, please stop at the back booth there and get one of those, that seaweed. See, Pomos were down to about 1,500 population around 1915 or 1950, and then they started eating a little more seaweed. Now we're the largest tribe in this area. So that's a seaweed back there, you guys. Just wrap it in that tortilla and then eat it.